Because he's about stats, he's about money, and now he'll get his money in Oakland. If Derek Carr can find a way to get the ball to him, I believe he'll be successful and get his stats, but that's all he cares about, and he's showing his true colors of not being a good teammate, and whether this is controversial or not, I really don't care, and now finally showing y'all that he's just not a good human.
I think you're candidly 100% right, and I think there was a school of thought, and maybe even I fell into it, that said Antonio Brown was just doing the things he needed to do to get himself out of Pittsburgh. He wanted the trade, he wanted a deal, and that once that was done, it would just sort of fade away. But it is not fading away, and that's the part of this that confuses me. He got everything he wanted, so what is he doing?
Well, I think he's now got to a point where we can't understand him. No matter how we try to look into Antonio Brown and say, this is who he is, this is what he's thinking, there's no way that we can actually come to a conclusion on that or find a solution as to why he is doing the things that he's doing. Other than that, he's just not a good dude. I am still protecting him. I'm not telling you all the things I know. I'm not letting you know other people's stories. I just gave a story about me dealing with Antonio Brown. But what he's doing now is showing the world that he's different behind that sly smile. He's different behind the touchdown dances, behind the Dancing with the Stars antics. There's a different individual and human inside or behind that 84 that we hadn't yet seen. And now each and every day, with the more money he gets, with the more attention he's starting to show us who he really is. They won't be asking him to stop antics, Greeny. They'll be asking him to not be himself, because this is who dude is. He hit it long enough. He was able to keep it away from the public as long as he possibly could. But now he just can't help himself because everybody's not doting over him. Everybody's not showing him the utmost love. Everybody's not saying that he's the greatest player or greatest person alive, and they need him. And so now he has to come out and create a narrative that says, you know what? I'm not wrong. I'm Antonio Brown. I've got all these yards. I've done all these things. It's Ben's fault that the relationship fell apart, and he's just not handling this in a good way. But in the end, he just has to go out and play football. And I guess if he does that, then the Oakland Raiders get what they want for a 3rd and a 5th round pick.
What's up, everybody? This is Elan Jones. I hope you're doing well today. I didn't expect to do this video because I'm working on a couple other videos, but I decided to take a break from that and talk about this situation because I'm tired. I'm tired of the choices of some Black people destroying the image of other Black people who don't fit that description. This is something that's starting to convince Black people as a whole that healthy, normal Black people don't exist. This is dangerous, and it's contributing to the breakdown of our society. In this video, I'm going to use the Antonio Brown scandal as an example of similar Me Too type situations that influence some very strong opinions about men, women, and this gender war that we're in. I feel that there has to be a better way than generalizing and swearing off Black men or women completely. Before I start, I have to give this disclaimer though. This might be triggering for some. But these are things that we need to talk about. It's time. No one's going to therapy, and there isn't sufficient therapy for Black people. So the best we can do, I suppose, is utilize the internet. And for everybody who must hear how white people do it too, yes, white people are riddled with certain issues. They have similar issues to us. As a human race, we all have our issues, but white people get adequate treatment and we don't or can't. These people are medicated. These people are in therapy once or twice a week, depending on what mental affliction they have. So we're different from them. So no, it's not just us, but I talk about Black people and I would like to keep it that way. So first, did it actually happen? I don't know. There are many other videos covering the story. You can watch those for more details, but I'm going to talk about what may have been going on behind the scenes, and this could give more insight. I had a few things cross my mind when I first heard this story. Maybe it's a case of unrequited love, and she wants to ruin his reputation out of bitterness. Maybe she's an opportunist. Maybe she's really sweet, and he pretended to be in love with this woman that they're saying he met in college and at Bible study. And maybe he manipulated her and dogged her out and was inappropriate with her. Maybe it actually happened. A few times I've talked about the responsibility of Black women to make better choices with the men that they deal with. But to their defense, things aren't always as consensual as they seem from the outside. There is such a thing as psychological abuse and psychological strongholds, and it's also not uncommon for the younger or more inexperienced woman to be manipulated by a manipulator or abused. And Taylor let it happen more than once. I mentioned in the past how two of the most prevalent personality types in the Black community are the narcissist and the borderline, and that they usually get involved with one another. Could this be a case of the borderline narcissist union? Possibly. I'm going to focus on the sexual pathology of the borderline and the narcissist and how that creates Me Too type situations. But before that, for anyone with these conditions, or disorders rather, specifically borderline personality disorder, I want to tell you that certain things are not your fault. There's an origin for everything. What you do have control over is how you respond to things, what you choose to do in a given situation. You have more control than you may think. So, a brief overview of borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. Narcissistic personality disorder, a mental condition in which a person has an inflated sense of self-importance. Narcissistic personality disorder is found more commonly in men. Symptoms include an excessive need for admiration, disregard for others' feelings, an inability to handle any criticism, and a sense of entitlement, troubled relationships, and a lack of empathy for others. Borderline personality disorder, a condition characterized by difficulties regulating emotion. Women are more likely than men to have borderline personality disorder. People who experience BPD feel emotions intensely and for extended periods of time, and it is harder for them to return to a stable baseline after an emotionally triggering event. The disorder is characterized by unstable moods, behavior, and relationships. Now let me attempt to take you into the mind of the borderline in a sexual scenario. BPD is a form of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and it's usually from past repeated trauma, which includes sexual trauma. With PTSD, you get flashbacks of the traumatic event, and with the borderline, in a sexual situation that resembles a past traumatic sexual situation, it will trigger a flashback, and the person usually has the same response they did when they were initially assaulted, which is usually when they were a powerless, vulnerable young kid. So the response to a new event is usually regression. They regress back to when they were a kid. And repression. They're not living in the present moment, and they block themselves from feeling uncomfortable about the sexual situation at hand. And those two things make way for denial. The disorder is a cycle of post-traumatic stress triggering certain responses, and that's what contributes to the shifting moods. That's what makes this a mood disorder. And that means that her mood is liable to change, and what she wanted in one moment, she won't want in the next. Also, people who were molested or sexually assaulted when they were young are usually hypersexual adults, as can be the borderline. Borderlines are definitely hypersexual sometimes, but it's usually ephemeral. These types can be in an episode, right? They can be going through something at that point in time, and they feel like they want to engage in a sex act that they otherwise wouldn't on a normal day in that moment. That's not what they actually want to do. They're just symptomatic. And that's the type of parasuicidal behavior that's putting oneself in a harmful situation or inflicting harm on oneself that the narcissist has no problem with taking advantage of, even though they know something is wrong with the person. When she says she wants to do some really wild sex act that may be harmful to her body, like a quadruple anal gangbang, excuse the vulgarity, and you say yes, you're a part of the problem. You are engaging in something that is harming her. You know it will harm her, but you do it anyway because you want what you want. I had a boss. He was my age. He was young. He was black. Not Black American, but Caribbean. He was handsome. Not that these things matter too much. But I worked for him part-time, and at that time I was going to school also, and I had my full-time job. And it was a legitimate job, legit company. He was the owner. One day we're talking on the phone. Oh, forgot to mention, he's a bona fide narcissist. And up until this point in my life, I hadn't really paid attention to these types of personality types. So I wasn't taking any mental notes. I wasn't able to distinguish them from anybody else. And I hadn't come across them too much to really take note. So it wasn't until I met this guy, who I found very bizarre, that I started taking notes. So one day we're talking on the phone. We're talking business, and then the conversation goes left, and he tells me proudly, boastfully, about how he used to run trains on girls in high school, his high school. So they were his age. He was a student at the time. So 15, 16, 17, 14, 18. And he was so proud of the fact that he corralled these young boys, these high school boys together. He got this group of boys together to form this gangbang group. He was really proud, particularly proud of the fact that he got the girls to consent to the gangbangs. And I had to be on that phone and hide my disgust and shock and horror and pretend like I was interested in this psycho story because I wanted more information on this type of personality. I needed all the information I could get, so I had to ask him probing questions. I needed to act interested. He proceeded to tell me that he asked some of the girls, "Why did you let us do that to you?" And they all answered, "I don't know." So take what you need from. So a problematic sexual situation could go like this. Being in the present situation triggers a flashback, and if it's potentially dangerous or boundaries are crossed or it's non-consensual, the woman will respond how she did when she was a kid, powerless, helpless, and let the assault happen. Some people, to feel like they have agency in that powerless situation, will act like they're okay with the sexual act in the moment. They'll laugh, they'll fake enjoyment somehow, and let it happen because they don't know how to enforce boundaries in that moment. And in that situation, the wrongdoing is repressed. And as they go further into the act, they regress back to their childhood self. They will essentially shut down. Pretending like everything is cool so the situation doesn't escalate is another reason for a passive response. The main objective there would be not angering the guy so he doesn't become violent towards her. Embarrassment may also cause the woman to not give a firm no. She'll feel silly overreacting and ashamed for being in that situation in the first place, insinuating sexual consent. When really, if you're feeling that way, you already crossed some boundaries. Nobody should have to feel guilty, embarrassed, ashamed about being physically involved with someone and not wanting it to escalate. Rape is a demon. It's a demon that comes over men that only goes away when he orgasms. So sometimes women do what they have to do to stay safe. So if he has to pop one on your back, Miss Taylor, he has to pop one on your back. Also, borderlines tend to be in gray area rape rather than vicious assault rape, and it tends to happen more than once because of their abnormal response to that type of situation. So it takes a while for the borderline to process the event, i.e. rape, because of this combination of regression and repression and confusion and denial. And some victims end up never coming out. Also keep in mind that not all rape victims are borderlines, by the way, and those people can have a similar response, though, to assault. So that's why the ones who are telling the truth about rape and sexual assault come out years later. After the repression period, they get the flashbacks of being wronged, and they become intermittently enraged, and they seesaw between, I'm going to leave it alone and get therapy and pray and get on with my life, and no, he has to pay for what he did to me, which is a normal response to a traumatic event. And this can cause someone to seek revenge. Remember, borderlines are serious about revenge, and it's oftentimes a reactionary response to something devious the narcissist did to them. So when they do something crazy to a guy, there's usually a story behind it. You know what I always live by? What always have lived by when it comes to dating? Normal guys don't have crazy exes. I know that if Brown is a narcissist and if Taylor has boundary issues, she likely kept seeing him after the initial assault because he apologized, love bombed her, then he started to devalue again, then the discard at the end. He did the full narcissist cycle on her. She could have been cool with him, seeing him, all of that, but he still could have crossed boundaries. She just didn't respond in a way that narcissists would respect or understand. You cannot be subtle and you cannot be passive with them. Narcissists feel entitled to get what they want, which includes your body. It would only make sense that narcissists are more inclined to rape someone, right? We're just looking at it logically right now. Now, for the men listening, this might be terrifying, right? And look, I'm not expecting you to completely understand the psychopathology of a borderline woman, but what you should be focusing on are the signs of a disordered woman and avoidance. And I know that this stuff may be confusing, but understand that it's a form of mental illness untreated. And understand that logic cannot explain why things happen the way they do in these types of situations. Human behavior is not always logical. You cannot only think with logic. But to try to help out, in the future, I'll have tips on how to disarm this type of personality so she doesn't get to a level of crazy that you can't handle. Solutions that are in the best interest of the both of you, actually. But for now, I'll give you this advice. Learn to reject over-the-top / inappropriate sexual advances from women, for example, gangbangs or other unhealthy sex acts. I know you may be saying to yourself, but she said yes. Just because somebody doesn't put up a boundary doesn't mean it's not wrong. Don't be a bad dude and you should be good. I see a lot of men playing victim when the woman retaliates after he ruined her body, her internal organs, during a sex act that she consented to. Ruined her anatomy. It wasn't right, and you know it wasn't right. You just wanted what you wanted in that moment, okay? And do not sleep with women under the influence of anything, and you should be good. So what could this situation be? Is Brown a narcissist? Is he a narcissistic type of dude? Has he ever had that type of behavior? Does this man have troubled relationships, a sense of entitlement, disregard for others' feelings, an inability to handle any criticism, a lack of empathy for others? Or is he normal? Is Taylor borderline? Does she have that sort of history? Or does she otherwise have boundary issues and was victimized? Or is she normal and an opportunist? The saddest thing about this situation is that whoever's telling the truth, the dysfunctional men and women before them ruin their credibility. And it's in our best interest that these types of people become easily identifiable in the future. So that's all I have for today. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll catch you in my next video.